Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I do know that this video is going up a little bit later than it normally would for my wrap up, but I was out in Sleepy Hollow this weekend, so it did kind of delay me getting this up, but we are here and it's time to talk about my September wrap up for 2022. Tried to read a lot of fall oriented, autumnal style books. Unfortunately, I did only get through 5 instead of my average 6, which was my goal, which is a bummer. But I did have a couple books I wasn't a fan of, but I did also have 2 5-star reads this month. So not a totally bad month, not the best month either. But yeah, let's dive right in. So first up this month, I read Hidden Pictures by Jason Reculach. This was a buddy read I did with my friend Black Acre Doe. I do have an entire in-depth review on this novel, and I'm going to just quickly read the inside flap for y'all. So it says, fresh out of rehab, Mallory Quinn takes a job in the affluent suburb of Springbrook, New Jersey, as a babysitter for Ted and Caroline Maxwell. She is to look after their 5-year-old son, Teddy. Mallory immediately loves this new job. She lives in the Maxwell's pool house, goes on nightly runs, and has the stability she craves. And she sincerely bonds with Teddy, a sweet, shy boy who is never without his sketchbook and pencil. His drawings are the usual fare: trees, rabbits, balloons. But one day, he draws something different: a man in a forest dragging a woman's lifeless body. As the days pass, Teddy's artwork becomes more sinister, and his stick figures evolve into more complex, lifelike sketches, well beyond the ability of any 5-year-old. Mallory begins to suspect these are glimpses of an unsolved murder from long ago, perhaps relayed by a supernatural force lingering in the forest behind the Maxwell's house. With help from a handsome landscaper and an eccentric neighbor, Mallory sets out to decipher these images and save Teddy, while coming to terms with the tragedy in her own past before it's too late. So I really enjoyed this book. This was a 5-star read from me. It does have many flaws, and it is a very plot-driven narrative. The characters in this are very one-note, very one-dimensional. There's no substance to them. And that was probably my only, real holdback with this book, is I just didn't care about the main character or her backstory or her friends. It just didn't mean anything to me because it didn't actually add anything to this story. And she began as a flawed character, but when we meet her, she has already overcome her flaws. So she was just kind of this just cliche, perfect main character. However, the actual story in this is awesome. This is a really interesting, murder mystery. It is supernatural. It is slightly a ghost story, you could argue. I did not realize that going in. I really did not think it was going to be supernatural. I thought they were going to kind of Riley Sager me, where you think it's going to be supernatural and then it's not. This is a supernatural story. So if that's something you're looking for, this will give you the ghosty vibes. I really liked this. This is a unique take on kind of a haunted house. This is a very unique case. This is a very unique take on a murder mystery. And the twists in this, I just did not see them coming. There's one minor twist that I definitely think I figured out, but the larger twist, I was just excuse me, what? And had no idea. And this book just kept me on the edge of my seat the whole time. I'd say the second half is definitely faster paced and stronger than the first half, as that's kind of when you get to this entire unraveling of the story. There are a couple red herrings that I thought were unnecessary because they kind of went nowhere, could have been easily avoided. But beyond that, while it does have its flaws, I did read this incredibly quickly, and I did devour the second half in a day, I think. So this is very fun. Again, this is definitely a beach read style book. Maybe not the most memorable in the long run, but definitely one that when it's in your hands, you're really going to want to speed read through it and figure out everything that happens. Okay, next up, I read Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives by Adam Cesare. I do have a whole video review on this as well. Many of you might know that the original Clown in a Cornfield back in 2020 was my top read of that year. I adored that book. It was like reading a cheesy slasher film, a B-movie film as a book. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was fun. I thought it was campy. I thought it was gory. This book, not so much. So I'm going to read the inside flap real quick. And there might be minor spoilers to Clown in a Cornfield 1, just beware as I'm reading this. After barely making it out of the Kettle Springs cornfield alive, Quinn's first year of college in Philadelphia should seem safe and easy. All she wants is to forget what happened and be a normal kid again. But instead, Quinn's past won't leave her alone, as she becomes the focus of a host of online conspiracy theories that claim to prove that the Kettle Springs massacre never happened. It's a deranged but relentless fantasy, and there is nothing Quinn can do to get people to hear the truth, not even on her own campus. So when murderous clowns simultaneously target Quinn at a college party, while another goes after her father back in Missouri, Quinn realizes that the facts alone are never going to save her. Her only option is to go back home, back into the cornfields, back to where the nightmare began, to set the record straight the only way she knows how. Because when the truth gets lost, that's when people start to die. It's an all-new horror classic about what happens when the truth is the last thing we want to believe. From Bram Stoker Award winner and master of thrills and chills, horror legend Adam Sassari. So this book took everything that I loved about the first one and removed all of that. This is not really a slasher. It's more of a political narrative, basically trying to masquerade as a horror story. It's very, very ingrained in real socio-political topics that are happening today, and it's just not fun. It takes a lot of characters that were kind of likable and whimsical and makes them unlikable and unwhimsical. A lot of characters are protected by plot armor. A lot of plot armor. And it just did not feel like a slasher or the traditional kind of B-horror movie that I loved from the first one. I feel like had I known this going in, this would have been a different reaction from me. But it's really hard to go from Friday the 13th, part 8, to like Us, you know? And not that this is like Us at all. It's a very, very weakly veiled metaphor for things that are happening today, whereas Jordan Peele is writing something that is a very strong, in-depth, conceptual ideology in what he's trying to say. This is just, well, this event actually happened. Let's dress the antagonists up as clowns and say it's something else completely. So, I don't know. I wasn't a fan of this. I thought it was very, very weak. I thought the writing was fine. But the overall story, the overall character development of our characters who were reintroduced from the last book just felt very, very short for me. It just felt very, very flat for me. And I just couldn't get through this. It took me, I mean, I finished it, but it just took me a very, very, very long time, which was shocking to me because the first book I read in, I think, 2 sittings. I think I had to go to work in between them. So like I read it, went to work, came back home and finished it. So this was very, very different reaction. And it just didn't have any of the classic stuff that I wanted. And I'm usually very wary of sequels. I'm usually very wary of series because I don't usually think that they hold up the second time around. And this was a huge letdown for me. Okay, next up. I also have a video review on this. This is the last book out of this month that I do also have full in-depth reviews on. This beautiful cover is Cunning Folk by Adam Nevill. Adam Nevill is one of those authors who tends to be very hit or miss with me. I feel like more recently he's been more hit than miss. And this book is an interesting one to talk about. I'm going to read the inside flap for y'all. No home is heaven with hell next door. Money's tight and their new home is a fixer-upper. Deep in rural southwest England, with an ancient wood at the foot of the garden, Tom and his family are miles from anywhere and anyone familiar. His wife Fiona was never convinced that buying the money pit at auction was a good idea, not least because the previous owner committed suicide, though no one can explain why. Within days of crossing the threshold, when hostilities break out with the elderly couple next door, Tom's dreams of future contentment are threatened by an escalating tit-for-tat campaign of petty damage and disruption. Increasingly isolated and tormented, Tom risks losing his home, everyone dear to him, and his mind. Because surely only the mad would suspect that the oddballs across the hedgerow command unearthly powers, a malicious magic even older than the eerie wood and the strange barrow therein. The hallowed realm from where he suspects his neighbors draw a hideous power. A compelling folk horror story of deadly rivalry and the oldest magic from the author of The Ritual, The Reddening, and the 4 times winner of the August Derleth Award for Best Horror Novel. Okay, so I liked this I liked this book. I actually don't know if I said this on the last one. Clown in a Cornfield was a 3-star read for me. This was a 4-star read for me. However, this is a very difficult book to get through. Adam Neville is very, very, very descriptive, and he's very wordy. That's kind of been a problem that he's had through a lot of his novels. But now that he's publishing under his own publishing company, I feel like his editors are editing even less out than they normally would have before. So this book I had to read at a very slow pace. I was very interested in this book, but it was so overly descriptive that a page that should have taken me, I don't know, a minute to get through would take me like 3 minutes to really process everything that he was saying, because he just packed so much into his stories. This book also started off as a film script, and it feels this way. So knowing those two things, this is definitely not the book for everybody, and it is definitely not a great book to start with if you're new to Adam Neville. That being said, it is a really interesting and unique folk story. It's very, very rooted in English folklore, and it really reminds me of the pacing of The Wicker Man, like the one from the 1970s. I believe I said that in my original review. But it is definitely one that it takes a while to get through, and you have to digest a lot of what is happening, and if you are trying to speed read this book, you're going to lose a lot of what it's trying to say. This book does have a lot of trigger warnings. There is like animal cruelty, and there is affliction towards children, like negative things happen to kids, which are two things I really typically don't like reading about in books. I think the way Neville did this was tasteful, and it was done in a way to show the evil natures of certain characters in the story, so it did actually add a lot to the plot and a lot to the motivations of certain characters. So I do understand why it was in there, but just so you guys know, that is in this book. But I did enjoy this. Again, this was not an easy read for me. It is very, very wordy. It is very, very slowly paced. And I feel like at the end, the climax is interesting, but just slightly underwhelming. Like, I really thought it was going to go like kind of all over the top, like a lot of Neville stuff does. Like, he always ends up with some kind of like weird cosmic horror moment. And I guess you could argue that kind of happens in this, but it just didn't feel as grand as some of his other works did. But I did, again, I really enjoyed this. It's definitely kind of like a slower paced, cozy horror book to read, though it's not really cozy horror. It's like really devastating and depraved horror, but just kind of told in this like lulling prose. I don't know. It's very unique. This is hard for me to talk about because I don't like necessarily the style that it was written in, but I really liked the story. And it was a very like relaxed horror movie, like a very relaxed horror story. Just because of the pacing and everything. It almost reminded me of like the Babadook, where like I feel like the Babadook isn't necessarily scary, but there's a lot of scary themes in it that happen. And like obviously there's like the moments of like jump scares and whatnot, but I did feel like there's something kind of lulling about this book. So I don't know. It's definitely not a book for everybody. I did enjoy it, but again, it was definitely a trek for me to get through, which did contribute to why I only read 5 books this month instead of 6, because I did spend like 2 weeks slowly making my way through this novel. But I did like it, and I do think it was worth it. If you want to hear more on my thoughts on this, again, I do have a full video on it because I don't want to go too in-depth with this one. Okay, next up. This was in my recent Nightworms package, and this is Anybody Home by Michael J. Seidlinger. I'm going to read the back real quick. What came first, the home or the desire to invade? A seasoned invader with multiple home invasions under their belt recounts their dark victories while offering tutelage to a new generation of ambitious home invaders, eager to make their mark on the annals of criminal history. From initial canvassing to home entry, the reader is complicit in every strangling and shattered window. The fear is inescapable. Examining the sanctuary of the home and one of the horror genre's most frightening tropes, Anybody Home points the camera lens onto the quiet suburbs and its unsuspecting abodes, any of which are potential stages for an invader ambitious enough to make it the scene of the next big crime sensation. Who knows, their performance just might make it to the silver screen. I really wanted to like this book. I thought the concept was really cool. I thought the execution on this was atrocious. I have no idea how this narrative could possibly take place. We are told through a narrator who is, it's almost like reading the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, where they're like, it's like demons writing to each other, talking and like giving each other advice, except this narrator is giving this invader advice from his own experience in real time, and he's not there. So I don't know if he's got like an earpiece and a camera going on, but it's very strange, and we only ever hear the words of the narrator, so we have to assume what the invader is saying, and it just got very, very complicated and very strange, and then it kind of spirals into just this jumbled mess, and so much so that all of the characters end up getting labeled with numbers. So like we have our narrator who is fully unnamed, and then we have like our head invader, who is Invader 1. And then there's Invaders 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we have our victims, who are also labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm fairly certain, because there's no names, that our author, Michael Seidlinger, actually got confused. Because there's an entire section in this book where who is labeled Victim 1 is talking. And I feel like it has to be Victim 2, because it comes back later and Victim 2 is the one referencing it, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know, but it just gets so freaking confusing. And then it just gets really, really depraved. And there's a lot of trigger warnings, very similar to the trigger warnings that I just spoke about in Cunning Folk, that are done very tastelessly. Again, injury to children. Again, animal cruelty. And I didn't like it. I didn't think it was necessary, and I think the way that our characters reacted to it was very unrealistic. And it was just foul, honestly. There's a level of extreme horror that I don't like that this definitely borderline, and that's definitely a preference thing for me. I do not like really extreme horror. And this kind of dipped its toes into those waters. And it just didn't, I didn't vibe with it. And I feel like the payoff at the end wasn't worth it. Like, you can read books like Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana, fully unhinged. But the writing is gorgeous. It is so well written. The narrative is so interesting. The imagery is beautiful in that book, as well as horrific. This had none of that. It was just kind of depraved from beginning to end, and didn't quite make sense. And the more I thought about how characters were responding, the more I was like, that just wouldn't happen. There were just plot holes left and right that I could see through, and just nothing quite made sense. And this whole idea that there's like a cult of people who encourage home invasions so that they'll get reenacted on the big screen as horror movies is just weird. And really needed to be explained more, because I feel like they kind of do that in Sandman, right? With like the, what's his name, Prometheus? Corinthian. I feel like they kind of do that, and that's like kind of what like maybe this was alluding to, or like a nod to, but this just made no sense. And like there were certain people who were there for like the theatrics of it, and certain people who were there for like just the payout, and I was just like, what payout? Like, it just didn't make any sense. And there was a character called, like, The Voice. And I have no idea who or what The Voice's purpose was, but they were there. And it was just, it was so bizarre and all over the place. And maybe this is, like, a tribute to something that I just don't understand. But I was so confused. Oh, also, the, like, blatant references to the Saw franchise were so blatant. They were so blatant. It was like, it wasn't even subtle at all. It was like, oh yes, like, they might well have just been like, yeah, we love Jigsaw at that point. I don't know. I hated this. This was a 2-star read for me. Only reason it wasn't a 1-star pretty much is because I finished it, but I was very unhappy reading that, and it didn't make me feel good inside. I don't feel like it added anything important or decent into like my horror literature collection. It was just, I did not vibe with that. Very interesting concept, and if you're into extreme horror, it might work for you, but it really fell apart when I thought about it in how it would work in reality. And there are certain things I don't like reading about in books, especially if they don't end up serving a purpose later on, and the grossness in that did not. All right, y'all, and finally, on a huge 180 of tone, and I had to read this after reading Anybody Home because I really needed something lighthearted. But this is The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. If you've been on my channel before, you know that I read Erin Sterling's prequel to this book, The X-Hex, last year. Or maybe it was earlier this year. It came in an unplugged book box that I got last year, and I read it. And it was very Halloween-y, and I didn't read it during Halloween, and I really, really regretted that. But it was fun and spooky and kooky and just filled with romance, and I believe I said then that it was like an adult Halloween town. Well, this is an even better adult Halloween town. This is the sequel. This follows our main characters from the X-Hex's siblings. So I'm going to read the back real quick. Again, there might be some spoilers to the X-Hex in this, but very minor. Gwen Jones is perfectly happy with her life in Graves Glen. She, her mom, and her cousin have formed a new and powerful coven. She's running a successful witchcraft shop, Something Wicked, and she started mentoring some of the younger witches in town. As Halloween approaches, there's only one problem: Llewellyn Wells Penhallow. Wells has come to Graves Glen to reestablish his family's connection to the town they founded and to make a new life for himself after years of being the dutiful son in Wales. When he opens up a shop of his own, Penhallow's, just across the street from Something Wicked, he quickly learns he's gotten more than he bargained for in going up against Gwen. When their professional competition leads to a very personal and very hot kiss, both Wells and Gwen are determined to stay away from each other, convinced the kiss was just a magical fluke. But when a mysterious new coven of witches comes to town and Gwen's powers begin fading, she and Wells must work together to figure out just what these new witches want and how to restore Gwen's magic before it's too late. This is cheesy. This has almost no plot, but it is spooky, it is fun, it is witchy, it is really just everything I want in a whimsical Halloween novel. And there's romance. I'm not a romance person, don't fully care about romance. This does it very, very well because it does balance this charm of like a small town dedicated to Halloween during October. It is so fall forward. It is so just everything I want to read about during spooky season, and I loved this book. Gwen is also a great character. She was one of my favorite characters in the X-Hex, and I'm really happy that she was the focal point of this narrative because she really is just fun and unique and really just captures who I would expect to be running like just a quirky, small witch shop. And I absolutely love her. I love her relationship with Wells. I love her talking cat. I just thought this was so much fun. This is not scary in the slightest. Again, there's virtually no plot in this. It is just like spooky Halloween goodness with some romance thrown in and some witchcraft, and things go awry. Have fun, enjoy it. I love this. This was a 5-star read for me. I really hope there's a third book because there is a third brother. But I just love how Erin Sterling shapes Graves Glen. I think it's a cute little town. I wish it was real. Reminds me a lot of Salem. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's probably based off of Salem. But it is just so fun. I love that it's a college town. I just love the university is kind of really intertwined with a lot of the stories without feeling like Hogwarts. But you do get that kind of like campusy, like almost like Pretty Little Liars when they just had that cute little town that was always fall for some reason. Like I just feel like I'm in that when I'm reading these books. So I adored this and I'm stunned that I did, but 5-star read for me, and I highly recommend reading this during the Halloween season because it's fantastic. Reminds me of like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, like the Melissa Joan Hart Sabrina. That's what you get with this. This was so much fun. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. So a couple hits, a couple misses. All in all, pretty solid month, I would say. Not necessarily the strongest, but definitely not a loss either.